I am Ellie Kusner. I'm the host and the moderator of this event. I'm the chair of the IADMS Dance Educators Committee, and I'm a Pilates and dance teacher in New York City. And I also co-host a podcast called DanceWell Podcast. And this meeting is happening on the Science for Dance Educators page, which is managed by the IADMS Dance Educators Committee. So some of you might not be familiar with IADMS. If you are, great. If you're not, let me tell you a little bit. IADMS is a professional organization that enhances health, well-being, training, and performance in dance by cultivating medical, scientific, and educational excellence. And as the Dance Educators Committee, our objective is to focus on you all, educators out there, and to both give you information and also hear from you what your experience is on the ground and how we can best serve you and help you become the healthiest, happiest dance educators you can be. So to that aim, during this strange and very overwhelming global pandemic, we are offering a series of panel conversations. And we held the first one last week on safe dance practice. And during that, we heard from you that you'd like more information about conditioning during this time. So aiming to get you the resources that you need, we've put together this panel of excellent people who I will introduce in a moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about conditioning, specifically about strength, power, endurance, and speed during this time of quarantine or emergence from quarantine, depending on where you are in the world. So I know a lot of you are really excited. We've gotten a lot of great feedback about this. So I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. And first is Nico Kolokythas, who ASCC PhD, is the lead strength and conditioning coach at the Elmhurst Ballet School and a consultant at the Birmingham Royal Ballet. He's a visiting lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton and a member of the IADMS Professional Development Committee. So there's Nico calling in from the UK. And next, Stevie Oakes is MFA CSCS. She's a dance artist and educator serving on the faculty at SUNY Brockport in New York. And she teaches studio courses, dance kinesiology, and dance pedagogy while simultaneously maintaining a creative research profile as a performer and collaborator. And then we have Dr. Robert Tsai, PT, DPT. He's a former professional dancer and a current physical therapist educator who seeks to bridge the sciences and the arts to promote knowledge, health, and wellness for the movement artists through DancePrehab. And thank you all for being here so much, giving your time so generously to us. I want to give a little plug, if I may, for a moment. Stevie and Nico are both winners of the Dance Educators Award, a prestigious award from IADMS. They were nominated by their peers and colleagues and students for that award and selected each in different years. And if I may, the nominees for this year's award have now opened. So if you know someone who is qualified for this award, we'd love to hear from you. You can find out more on this Facebook group or on the IADMS Facebook group and also on the IADMS webpage. So without further ado, this will be a combination of sort of information dissemination, a little bit of slides and education, and then a conversation about your needs. So the beauty of Facebook Live is that we can hear in real time your comments and questions, and I'll be tracing those and feeding them to the panelists. So please do write in if you have any questions or comments. We're eager to hear your experiences and your needs. And Nico, would you like to get us started?
Yes, of course. I think I need to click the share screen first. So if we can double check that this has loaded and
looks like it's starting. There we go.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. So Ellie, thank you very much for organizing this panel, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I find the topic very interesting, and it is a topic of interest to me. So, but before I go into the details and terminology, I'd like to put this into context, and I'd like to talk about the something that the dance educators worry quite a lot when they are away from the studio and they cannot do what they want to do. And that is the fear of loss of muscle memory. And even though I understand, I think I need to give some information as to why we don't need to worry as much for this. And the reason for this is that the brain and the body is always connected, and what the information that we put in the brain is not easily lost. So I'd like to talk a little bit, and I'm not going to go too deep, or it's not going to get very technical about skill acquisition. And I want you to, for the viewers, I want you to imagine the brain as a field of grass. And this field of grass is where everything is happening, and learning happens in stages. So the first stage of learning is called cognitive. And the way to imagine this in that field of grass is when you have a field of grass that nobody has stepped on, and you start walking with your friend and you're going across the field, you're creating a path. And that path, as you can see in the picture, is not very clear, but there is still something going on there because somebody has stepped on the grass. And that's the cognitive stage of learning. This is when the learner has to think a lot about the skill that we are introducing. So coaching and teaching is really important at that stage. It has to be very supportive, but there is a lot of thinking process in order for this to happen. But once the skill has moved to the next stage, it goes to what we call the associative stage. And that's when the path is a lot clearer. There's no doubt that there is a path there, but it's still, it's still a bit grassy. You can still see a bit of grass, but it is a lot deeper, which means that we don't need to think as much in order to actually execute the skill. And coaching and teaching changes because the cues change. The learner is a little bit more experienced, and that pathway exists now. So the learner knows the skill, but can't do it consistently and accurately. So then as practice moves on, the next stage is the autonomous stage. And that's when there's no grass in the field. You have dug the depth of that pathway, and the skill is there. There is not a lot of thinking. And then again, the coaching and the teaching changes because the cues can be a lot more about the details and the refinement of the move. And as you move on, and of course, we have to understand that this is a personal journey. We don't know how long it's going to take for somebody to learn something. But as we move from one stage to another, we can clearly see that the thinking process changes, and at some point things don't happen with thinking. Things just happen, and then there is flow in the movement. And when we move to the professionals, for the professionals, it's like a highway. This is so well ingrained in the brain that it's very difficult to get any grass there. Even if they don't do something for a long time, it's a highway. You can't lose the skill. But if you look, there are two arrows in the picture. There are some shadows of paths on the right-hand side. Even for the professional, this could be a new choreo. This could be a new skill that the professional is trying to learn. And the pathways have to start similarly to when we're going for a new skill with a beginner. So the reason I'm putting this together is to just put dance educators at ease that depending at what level of skill you have, there is going to be some loss of refinement, but once you know a skill, it's very difficult to lose it. Of course, if we're talking about beginners, like 11 years old or 12-year-olds starting their vocational education, they are not very skillful anyway. So yes, there will be loss of the ability to do exactly what we want them to do. But again, they are fresh, so that's easily changed. But if you are advanced, it is not, the fear should not be that you're going to lose the skill. All you're going to lose is the refinement of the skill, which you can very easily find again once you start training. And of course, we have to connect all this information with fitness. And when we look at fitness, fitness is lots of different components put together. And if we look at this diagram here, it's the elements of strength, flexibility, speed, endurance, all connected in order to perform a skill, which you can see on your top left in the screen. Now, strength is a skill as well. And in order to teach the body how to be stronger, you need to go through the stages. Because if, let's say, you're teaching a beginner how to squat, you're not going to give this participant a barbell with extreme load. You're going to teach the bodyweight squat, and then once they are familiar with the skill, you're going to start loading it a little bit, maybe with some bands, and then slowly you're going to give them some load. So it's a skill that needs to be learned and go through all the stages. But everything is important when we're talking about elite performance of a skill. You need to have strength, you need to have speed, flexibility, and endurance. You can't just focus on one element. And when we're talking about dance, it might not be to the same level of, let's say, a basketball player or a sprinter, but there is still elements of strength, speed, flexibility, and endurance that are needed in order to perform the skill. And on top of these components, we need to think about athleticism. Over and over again, I hear directors talking about the demands of the dance industry, how the demands have changed and how choreographies have become more experimental, and they're trying to push the boundaries of the body. And they have brought this term in of athleticism. So what is athleticism? It's the ability to perform something with confidence and accuracy. So it's taking those components of fitness and then put them into movement in order for you to be confident and accurate and consistent with your movement. Then if we look into movement execution and we look into the different components of qualitative and quantitative, because of this pandemic and because of us being isolated in our own house, it is impossible to cover everything. That means that you can't have it all, and it's okay. Because even though you can't do the quantitative characteristics of movement, we can discuss about qualitative. So we can discuss about the rhythm of movement, the connection, the flow, the accuracy, the stability. And these are things that dance educators know very well. They know very well and they demand very well from their students. Therefore, this is the time where we have to maybe reconsider what we can do, and we might have to redesign our classes and our sessions in order to focus on different parameters. And the same goes for the fitness instructors, strength coaches, etc. Because we are not going to be able to have a lot of load. We are not going to be able to have a lot of movement. We might not be able to run. We might not be able to jump. We might be able to jump upwards, but we might not be able to jump forward, depending on the space of our students or dancers. So changing the focus just because we can't have it all doesn't mean that we are going to lose everything, because we definitely have the ability to do something. Therefore, stop worrying about what you can't do, and let's discuss and focus on what you can do. So moving a step forward now, in order for us to discuss about strength, power, endurance, I think it's best to put some terminology. And this is from a presentation I did with Professor Matt Wine a few years ago in IADMS, where we gave clear definitions about what what are we talking about when we say strength? Because there are some misconceptions, and you see this in research as well, especially in dance, where practitioners are talking about strength, but the protocol shows that they probably did something different. So strength is the maximal amount of force a muscle or a group of muscles can generate. Now, this is going to be a bit problematic when we are in quarantine. You might not be able to develop maximal muscular strength. Power is the product of strength and speed of a movement. This is probably something we can actually work within the limitations and boundaries of the quarantine. And then we have endurance, which is the ability of a muscle to sustain repeated muscle action or a single static action. So you could say a développé à la seconde. If you have to hold the leg high for an extended amount of time, that would be endurance. Now, if you look at the protocols for different training goals, we have different protocol for different goals. If you're working for endurance, you are talking about having small load, but a lot of repetitions with hypertrophy, which hypertrophy means increasing the size of the muscle. And we need to be careful when we're talking to dancers, especially female dancers, about increasing the size of the muscle. We are not talking about bodybuilding. You can do less repetitions and you increase the load that you're using. Then we're talking about strength, and then the load increases even more. And with power, you have different protocols that you can develop power, you decrease the load, or you can use jumping. Now, what is really interesting is that in dance, the focus is mainly on endurance. So there is not a lot of time spent for the other elements that you need in order to develop your fitness and to develop your athleticism. And the problem is that when we're talking about strength training in dance, there is a misconception, especially in the female population, because when we talk about strength training, the girls think of this, which is something that we do not want, and we wouldn't, I wouldn't have a job if I was promoting something like this. But we're talking about something like this. And nowadays we can even say about dancers like this, because I know Claire is doing strength training, and she's actually a very, very strong female dancer. So now we have examples of female dancers who have embraced, if you want, strength training, and we can use them as an example for our female participants. And one of the reasons, well, a few reasons that this fear needs to be demystified is because the discipline drives the training. When you are in vocational education, or if you are professional, in vocational education, you may be dancing between 19 to 37 hours a week, depending on what age or what level you are. If you are a professional, it's a full-time job. Again, it's 37 to 40 hours a week. So supplementary training cannot take a lot of time. The bodybuilders, the female bodybuilders, spend probably 7 days a week in the gym and many, many hours of lifting, and they take a lot of drugs. And the other factor that is really important is nutrition. That with doing all these hours of training, or when you're working, in order to supplement your nutrition and develop muscle size, you would probably have to eat 3 or 4 times the calories that somebody's consuming in the dance environment. And the other thing that is really interesting is that we now have some evidence that with bodyweight exercises, we can develop physiological parameters in adolescent dancers. What we found in this study that we did at Elmhurst Ballet School was that we dedicated 30 minutes on a daily basis, 5 days a week, between 7 and 9 weeks. And both the intervention group and the control group improved. And that showed me that because we actually dedicated those 30 minutes in conditioning, the students got better. They jumped higher and they were stronger. And we even managed to change the interlimbar symmetry between left and right leg. So with a small doses of exercise, we managed to create physiological adaptation, which means that during this lockdown, we can use our body, and if we do it cleverly, we can get some adaptations and we can get improvements, not just maintain what we have, but get even better. And here I'd like to talk a little bit about this residual effect of training. So if you think that you have day 0, which is going to be your last day of training, and it was probably the last day before lockdown, it's not that, you know, the next day you're going to lose everything. It takes time, depending on the level of fitness, it takes time for you to lose and detrain. So if we go from the end of the diagram, maximum strength and aerobic endurance takes about 30 days for you to deteriorate. That means that if you supplement within that month, if you supplement your sessions with some maximal strength and aerobic training, you can maintain what you have. And the same goes for anaerobic endurance and strength endurance. It takes less for you to deteriorate. But again, if you know these limitations and you keep supplementing your training with what you need, you can maintain and go further. And to give an example of in sports of a mixed martial artist, the professional mixed martial arts train, he doesn't maintain his sword really sharp every day of the year, because when he's getting ready for a fight, we get an 8, maximum 9 weeks of camp. That means that we are always calculating with his training what he needs and where he needs to go. If we were to think like this in dance, we could make life a little bit easier. However, we need to be mindful, because in dance, things are a little bit more gray. You don't need to go to maximal level of strength. Nothing needs to be at a maximum. So you need to be strong. We don't know exactly how strong you need to be, but you need to be strong, but you don't need to push the boundaries at all times. So there is going to be deterioration, but I think if we are clever with what we offer to our dancers and students, we can definitely maintain some level of fitness and use it as an opportunity in order to do the things that maybe we can't even do because there is so many other things to cover with technique. So at this point, I'd like to pass on to Rob, because I know he has some interesting things to share.
All right, let's do this. So we just heard from Nico, you know, the speed, strength, endurance, and power. All of these are going to play a role in the dancer, right? Now, these things aren't exclusive to each other. So to some extent, there's going to be a relationship between all of these. So even though we're talking about these 4 items, it's not just, you know, these 4 hard items. And so I will talk about kind of what all of these things, the interplay of all these factors, and some things to consider as far as, you know, when we return to dance and things of the sort. So let's begin first with talking about strength. So strength is going to be your ability to exert force, right? So there are several different aspects involved in this, and that's going to be either muscle contractility, so your ability for your fibers and their muscles to contract, 1. 2, there's going to be some level of nerve to muscle connections. So how, you know, what we call motor units, how well is the muscle connected to your nervous system, to your nerves, in order to send signals efficiently. And 3, there's going to be neuromuscular control. Now, neuromuscular control seems very broad, but for our purposes here, we'll talk about it in terms of things like coordination, sequencing, right? Making sure that we are using hopefully muscles in a good pattern. So generally with any kind of deconditioning, and we've been, for us here at California, at least, we've been here, I think this is week 8 or around week 9. So we will be seeing some kind of decrease in these aspects in terms of power, speed, and endurance because our strength is affected. And I understand a lot of dancers out there are still training very hard. However, the reality is that we're not in the studio. We're having to think about our space. So we're probably not going as full out as we normally would. So there are going to be some changes here. So in continuing to break this down, we talked about strength. Let's talk about power. So mathematically speaking, power is how much work you put in over a period of time. So I would like to use the analogy of when we're driving, you're either stepping on the gas or you're putting on the brakes, right? People talk about my car goes from 0 to 60 in blah, blah, blah seconds. So how much power is going to be involved in that? So I want you to think about that. And we'll talk about this in terms of jumps. This is just the most obvious example I can give here. But let's talk about initiating a jump and let's talk about landing a jump. So with that analogy, we're talking about stepping on the gas and we're talking about putting on the brakes. Each of these aspects are going to require some kind of power. So in the context of initiating a jump, right? If we haven't been doing large movements, it's probably safe to say that we aren't doing any, for our ballet population, grand allegro or across the floor, things like that. We haven't been doing these to the extent that we normally would. So your body is not going to be used to doing this, when we get back. And we'll talk more about this later. But as far as power is concerned to initiate a jump, so what we would call concentric muscle activity, decreases in strength in large muscle groups may cause smaller muscle groups to have to compensate because we're not producing enough force. Therefore, there's like an over-reliance, or there's going to be more dependency on smaller muscle groups. And so this is where you may be seeing things like in the future, hopefully not, but strains, muscle strains because they're overworking, overuse syndromes, or even tendinopathies. So the tendons of the muscles themselves then come under more stress because they're unable to handle the forces required in an efficient manner if we're just kind of compensating here. So that was more about initiating a jump. Now, if I'm talking about landing a jump, this is probably something that we might not focus on as much. Most of the time, we're more concerned with trying to get up, but we also think about how we need to get down. So when we talk about landing a jump, you will hear the term eccentric muscle control, and this is going to be your putting on the brakes, right? If you're on the freeway and you're going pretty fast and you slam on the brakes, you're going to require a lot more power to stop in a shorter period of time. So in the context of dance, if I have to land a jump, or even landing on my arms too, if I have to land and go, then I'm thinking about I have to stop in a short period of time. I need more power, and then I need more power to change my direction. So this is where strength and coordination is really going to come in. So there have been a lot of other physical therapists out there talking about alignment and things to look for. Most commonly, people will talk about like, oh, don't let your knee cave in, don't let your foot roll in, being able to control those aspects. But in the context of a jump, it isn't just about statically holding your foot and looking at a postural position, but you're looking at the dynamic forces that are involved in this. And what we'll often see here is that if I don't have enough power to put on the brakes with my muscles, in this case that we're talking about, then we may result in an over-reliance on tissues and structures that are less extensible. So we're talking about ligaments, joint capsules. You rely on kind of just like that passive tension to kind of keep everything in place. And that's where you're going to see things like either MCL or LCL, which is knee ligaments on either side. You might see more discomfort there, or same thing, you may see more stress on things like tendons if we're talking about like jumper's knee or runner's knees. So this is just kind of an overall example of how to, of like things to be cognizant of, like as we return to dance as well. Next, we talked about strength, we talked about power. Now let's talk about speed. So generally with speed, I think of it more in terms of agility and your ability to rapidly change directions. Obviously, there's also speed, just straight running, which is in the strength and conditioning world, most of the literature is just going to be your ability to produce maximal power, go, 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 go. But with dance, right, we're constantly changing directions. We're constantly having to negotiate other bodies on stage, things like that. So as far as strength, I want to talk about two aspects about speed, which is going to be strength and also coordination control, which then comes down to your nervous system. So your ability to send signals efficiently and quickly from your brain to your muscles and vice versa. So as far as strength is concerned, right, if we're having some decreased stability, especially in our upper body, and I'm having to switch directions quickly, or I'm having to just suddenly push off, then I am thinking about wanting to use my whole body to do this. But let's say, for example, if we haven't been training upper body strength or stability, and now I'm having to move, that's going to place a lot more stress on, say, like my ankles or my knees. And so my speed is going to be affected because I don't have the stability to negotiate these quick changes. And going back to the strength aspect of it, think of a building, and if I have a building and I'm solid and everything up top is good, then that's great. Everything's kind of stable. But now if I'm a tall building and the wind's blowing real hard and I'm doing a lot of this and I don't have the stability up top, all that stress is going to come down to the bottom. So how is that going to affect our ability to, once again, switch directions? And how is that going to affect our ability to kind of stay stable with these quick movements? When we talk about the nervous system, right, we just talked about strength, let's talk about the nervous system. So it's not just about how much power or how much strength I have in a muscle, it's how I'm using these things that are available to me. So we're talking about possibly a little bit of decreased coordination, possibly a little bit of decreased reaction time. And as far as the nervous system is concerned, or different ways that we negotiate our environments, one of the things I will say is I have had a few people who have said, like, oh yeah, my balance definitely feels more off since I've been in quarantine. And one, that may have something to do with the fact that we might just not be training aspects of our balance as much. But the other thing might also even be we're not using the mirror, right? A lot of kids at home are probably just watching the computer and then learning from there. And if you have mirrors, that's great. But if balance relies on multiple aspects, so balance relies on vision, relies on vestibular, so your inner ear, and it also relies on your sensation on the ground. What we find is that because we're dancing into the mirror so much, there may be some kind of visual dependence for balance. And once you take that away, now it's like a whole nother ball game, especially for a lot of our younger dancers who are still developing and these systems are still developing. So as far as deficits or things we might see decrease in the nervous system, coordination, reaction time, so possibly we hope not, but things like falls or even tripping, or just kind of like tripping over your own feet, if you decide to go into some crazy petit allegro the first day back, it might not be the best idea. Lastly, so strength, power, speed, let's talk about endurance. So there's going to be two aspects to this, which is going to be your aerobic endurance and your muscle endurance. And a lot of this is going to be related to fatigue. Nico touched on muscle endurance as, the ability to repeat a movement or, sustain positions for long periods of time. So if we haven't done large kicks or any kind of like large jumps and things like that, and we have to do them over and over and over again, we're not going to be able to do them, where we left off. And as far as things that we might see might be, once again, going back up to the power aspect, if I'm not producing enough power in order to continue these motions, then what happens is, once again, I am going to have suboptimal activation of certain muscle groups, and that's going to result in possible compensatory mechanisms, right? I'm going to use smaller muscles to do, I'm going to try to compensate with smaller muscles to do the work that the big muscles have to do. And then as far as aerobic endurance, this is our body's ability to utilize oxygen, right? So oxygen is part of the body's way of producing energy, and energy is part of the way that our muscles and nerves work. So if I'm not efficiently delivering oxygen to, for example, my muscles, they probably won't contract as efficiently. If I'm not delivering oxygen efficiently to my nerves, they're not going to send messages throughout my body in order for me to kind of negotiate my what I have to do, what my demand is efficiently. So, and it's not unknown in the dance research world that fatigue is very much associated with increased injury, and if we look at, once again, a lot of this research is in the ballet population, but fatigue as a factor of injury, will occur during generally like middle or end of a season when you've already gone for some time, and then also with high cardiovascular activity. So when your body has to deliver power or I guess oxygen to your body in order to have you produce power efficiently, when that's not happening, you're going to respond less optimally. So we covered strength, power, speed, and endurance. There we go. Different aspects of each, but once again, like I said, strength also kind of segues itself into all of these aspects. So I have several suggestions that I would give to a lot of our dance educators out there, or if you're working with kids especially, or working with anybody. And these are not hard suggestions. In fact, these are just some things to begin thinking about. I think, we could always say like ABC, like absolutely, we can't really say absolutely do these things. I think the difficult part right now is that this is absolutely uncharted territory. This is something that we have never gone through for our generation. And I will tell you that even with the sports population, so youth sports, college sports, professional sports, they are also trying to figure out what they need to do. And if they have all the information that they have from research and they're still trying to figure out what to do, then it behooves us to have a very purposeful and intentional conversation about how to return our dancers back to dance. Okay. So one of the suggestions I will say, I kind of had like a 3 no's and 3 yes kind of situation. So the first thing is going to be, you can't start where you left off. There are various studies that look at the effects of deconditioning, and a lot of this, by week 4, there are already changes. And for us in California, if we're already at week 7 or 8, that's well past the week 4 point. So we can't start where we left off, because as a whole, I would caution us on assuming that everybody was keeping up on their training. And even if they were keeping up on their training, they're dancing in different environments. So we're not able to really, for example, invest in large ranges of motion and feel comfortable with that. There's always going to probably be a little bit of like, oh yeah, but I don't want to hit my lamp. So proprioceptively, and the way we kind of feel our body in space is going to be a little different. So once again, we can't start where we left off. I kind of hit my second point, which is going to be cautious or possibly avoid large full range movements as we return to dance. I know a lot of people will be excited to get back and think, man, I haven't done Grand Allegro in months. Let me just kick my leg up where I want it to be. And right. And once again, like I said, in terms of the range, if I haven't been moving through my range of motion completely, my body isn't going to be familiar if I have to suddenly move large again. So this is about trying to reprogram yourself to be familiar with these movements again, so you can control it. And this is an aspect of going back to what we talked about earlier, when Nico was talking about strength, speed, endurance, power, right? Being able to control emotions. And this is a conversation that we constantly have, even without our current situation. So, and then the third thing is to really be cautious of is going to be that not everybody will be at the same level. And I speak this more so towards like studio environments, because people tend to divide groups into like, oh, this is your intermediate class and this is your advanced class. But, you know, in your advanced class, a 12-year-old is going to be very different from an 18-year-old. So I think, and you know, we were talking about this before too, everyone's home environment is different. So your opportunities for training and opportunities for training your body is going to be different. So I think this is going to be something cautious to at least be cognizant of, right? And if another example would be if you had a dancer that recently ramped up their training right before all of this happened, their deconditioning is going to be more apparent than that of somebody who was training pretty consistently early on, right? So if you had a young dancer that, say, recently started, oh, I want to go on point, you know, and now suddenly a month or 2 months into going on point for the first time, they are, you know, they haven't had the proper hands-on instruction, or they haven't had the ability to really get these cues, then I would say for someone like that, you're going to have to start from square one again, you know, just to make sure they're moving well. The three things I would say we should definitely be doing is going to be incorporate some kind of resistance training. Now, as far as this, you know, you can do this with bands, you can do this with weights. And the idea is that you are beginning to reintroduce awareness of alignment once again, and placing that good stress on the body. One thing that I will always say is that, like, this condition isn't just affecting us as humans. I mean, this condition isn't affecting us as dancers. This is affecting us as humans. So being able to come back to a strong human foundation is always going to be beneficial, so we can extend our artistry from those things. The other thing I will also say that is going to be important is this idea of increased flexibility. And I say increased. With most deconditioning studies, people will say like, oh, I've lost flexibility, and people are going to be concerned with like, I've lost flexibility, I lost flexibility. There is a situation where if somebody was initially dealing with an injury, or you know, is now healed. Now, once you've healed, your muscles can now tolerate stretch much better. It can tolerate tension much better. So there will be, you know, people may find that like, wow, I can, you know, get my leg higher, or passively stretch more. But I would caution against this, just because, once again, learning how to control that range. It might feel like you have more flexibility, but the reality is that your muscles are just more tolerant to that stretch. So, and then the third final thing for us today is really just communicate. Yes, you know, this is going to be an effort, not just about throwing the dancer back in, but, you know, as a teacher, my first and foremost thing would be, you know, remember where all these students are coming from. So whether or not they're dancing in home, in a kitchen, or in a garage, you know. And then the other thing too is that everyone's going to be excited to be back. Nobody wants to be told they can't do something. And so we don't know. Anecdotally, I have been hearing stories about dancers starting to have things like knee pain, ankle pain, back pain, old injuries coming back because of all these hard surfaces. And so I think it's going to help us a lot if we can communicate and say, create an environment where it's okay for them to come back, and for them to focus on injuries, but so that they don't hide these things and just come back and they're excited. And then if they're excited, they don't think about what they need to do for themselves, and that then resulting in further problems down the line. So like I said, this is new for everybody. This is new for us. This is new for the entire dance community as a whole. So I think really kind of approaching this purposefully and intentionally is going to be key in terms of preventing injuries.
Great, thank you so much, Rob. And we'll talk a little bit more about that return to dance with all the panelists in a moment, as well as kind of this interesting dialogue that unintentionally emerged between Nico and Rob in terms of like Nico reassuring us that like you can do a lot, you can maintain a lot during this time, and Rob saying you can, but also be aware. So we'll continue to kind of have that back and forth and talk you through more of those details. And we are getting some questions from people listening, so we'll address those in a moment. But Stevie, I know you also really wanted to talk about sort of where Rob left off with this kind of whole dancer and the other components besides just the physiological ones that come into play when we consider these topics. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing with students and how this is playing out for you and what your concerns are as an educator?
What I appreciate most that's coming up, I think, in how I'm hearing Nico talk and how I'm hearing Rob talk, and just the way IADMS has been presenting material, is thinking of the whole dancer. So not just the biological components of the dancer that are our fitness or our body or our instrument, but also the psychological components of who these dancers are, or where they're situated, or how they're coping themselves inside of this particular very strange era, and then the culture that we're creating around them to support them, the dance community, how we're rallying, how we're creating and offering innovation, but also noticing that our dancers are away from us and in their own communities or social environments, and the kinds of support that they may or may not have there, or how they're adapting to being back at home or in new environments. And so to just be really generous, I think, in our treatment of wholeness, and dance is already positioned to do that. And so as dance educators, I feel like we're already set up to think about the artist and the human and the technician or the instrument at the same time, and to continue to come back to those things. When I was working at the Harkness Center for Dance Injuries, MJ Liederbach introduced me to this idea of biopsychosocial model, right? The biological coming together with the psychological and the social as a whole unit. It's a notion that's been in medicine in varying parts since the mid-70s, Dr. George Engel, but just to sort of give it a name and say that we'll continue, at least from my perspective, to return back to this whole human. And so my students, they're talking about not feeling like they're necessarily in the right frame of mind to be moving, that some of them are overwhelmed with the plethora of resources that are out there, and others of them are feeling more like spending time with their family or taking the dog for a walk. And so trying to think about how to validate those experiences and not minimize them seems pretty important. And one of the ways I've been doing that has been just starting each class with a check-in. And it's real, and it's not, them just nodding and telling me that they're great or that things are good, but sometimes taking that into abstraction, asking them about colors or textures or other things, or just to sort of like give them mindfulness skills in order to really check in and move from that place without a judgment to it. So thinking about their psychological state when they're trying to figure out what resource they want to use. And we've talked about this previously as a small panel, just the number of ways that you could engage with your time. And so how to be smart and discerning when you're choosing which online strength coach to watch, or what crazy YouTube video you want to follow, or which teachers are resonating with you, and how much of it we should be doing, right? That just because you're at home and you feel like maybe you're not doing anything, you don't need to then suddenly
You're back.
Great. Yeah, so just thinking about the volume of things that are available online, and also, how to choose and how to check in. Both of those things are important and valid. And to Nico's point about sort of qualitative dance journey right now, we can really focus on how things are happening and how we feel about them, rather than worrying too much about how the numbers.
Stevie, I want to hear more. I wonder if I should pause for a moment and come back to you. You have a very cute expression on your face, but you're frozen in it. So you're back.
All of my students who are at home right now and are going to watch this live stream video later are laughing because this is every technique class that we have together. And I keep asking them to make sure that they take a screenshot with my face, however it has frozen. So here's another opportunity for that. I think the last thing that I want to just offer is thinking a little bit about access. As we're in quarantine, thinking about sort of the challenge of being separated from your dance family or the dance studio. You know, that we're using really clever strategies to invite students in wherever they are. I talked to Nico and Rob and Ellie a little bit about how we've had competitions for who has the best virtual background. And it sorts to level the playing field for how we're introducing people into our homes or worried about what's happening in the background to sort of normalize the situation. My dogs make often appearances into video streams that I'm making, or right, we're all working under these conditions. So I think being really thoughtful about the kinds of norms that we're establishing or expectations so that we can continue to do a lot of things really well without feeling like they have to be just the way they were before. Anyway, we're all figuring it out. I feel like a lot of us are finding a lot of successes in places, and so I'm excited to have this forum and other ways where we're sharing those successes and what's possible rather than focusing on all the things we wish it weren't.
Yeah. Is that something? Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's talk, Stevie initiated a couple ideas, which is that there's so much material out there right now. I mean, students can access anything, all different caliber of things. And this gets to issues of media literacy that we see. I mean, listen, we see it with the news, we see it with nutrition information, and we see it with strength and conditioning. So I think we certainly maybe need to talk about how do you vet a source? How do you know? And I think Rob made a good point. Everybody wants ABC. They want do this, do that, do this. You know, they want us to give a checklist that's like, they have to have this training and they have to have had that experience, but it's not the case. You know, sometimes people have all the right trainings, but they have a hard time connecting with you or, you know, whatever. So there isn't really a ABC checklist, but let's just go around and sort of see what your ideas are about how do you personally look at all the strength and conditioning stuff that's out there and decide what works for you. Nico, do you want to start with that?
Do you mean assessing other people's content or the type of content that I'm using?
Well, I guess you can use your own personal examples, but if we think about the teachers who are out there and they're seeing a video of something that somebody does in class, and, oh, maybe I should be doing that in class, or they see, you know, a professional who's working with elite dancers and, okay, well, I guess that's what the elite dancers are doing. Should I be doing that at my studio? Like, how do they look at this conditioning stuff and know what is right for them?
Yeah, it's a valid question, and I don't think there is an easy answer to this, because if, let's say, we were to look at this 20 years ago, there wouldn't be so much content, and the online platforms wouldn't be there in order for you to have access. Whereas now my feeds on Instagram and on Twitter are full of people demonstrating exercises, and there are good things about this, but there are also bad things about this, because the offering random exercises may be promoting something, but it doesn't put it into context. So people who don't know then may be misleaded, and then they may be thinking exactly what you're saying, that, oh, maybe I should be doing this. So context is really important. So the way I look at content from other people's feed is how full is the post? Is it taking me through the whole process so that I can understand why am I seeing what I'm seeing? And I think this is something that other dance educators should be doing. So it's not about simply looking who's got the most followers, which is something that we touched on yesterday in our chat, Stevie. It's whether the content makes sense and whether there is a start and an end of what am I seeing and why am I seeing it. And even then, it's very difficult to self-assess and understand what exactly you need. So I think the same way that you need the teacher to take you through the steps in order for you to become a professional dancer, you do need to seek for advice and not simply take the task in your hands, because there is so much content now, and especially now because we are stuck in the house and we are in front of a screen quite a lot. Stevie touched this yesterday in our chat, that how do you organize this? How do you choose which classes to do in order to get the optimum effect? So I think you need to seek advice from the people who are actually do this for a living. So it is a new era, but I don't think that young dancers should take the task in their hands, and I don't think that dance teachers should take the task in their hands. So collaborating with a professional that you feel comfortable with, and nowadays it doesn't really need to be locally because you can do this online. I think that would be the best advice, because the dance educators and the people who have studied training organization, this is their job. So you don't maybe necessarily need the constant contact, but helping you organize the weekly or the monthly program, I think that would be my advice.
That's great. That's really making sense. I'm thinking about my own practice right now. It's like, I can teach people to do a, high intensity interval session, right? Like I can teach somebody to do high marches and squats. Like I'm qualified for that, but yeah, really not my area of expertise. I can do it, but I am not the expert. And I have found myself really delving deep into Pilates right now. Like right now, when I teach a Pilates class, it is only Pilates, because I just feel like I know people need that. They need those high intensity interval training sessions. They need a little resistance training. They need that stuff. And there's so much out there. They should go to the best person for that right now, and I know what I can offer best. And so I'm going to offer that, and just stick with that. So I think what you're saying is really helpful. Like if you're a dance teacher, just be a really, really good dance teacher right now. And you can think about these ideas and you can have them in mind, and you can help, fill in the gaps with other professionals. But it might be a really good time to just really be a great dance teacher.
If I may, I think this is an opportunity, even though what has happened globally is not, we're not at a happy place. This could be an opportunity for further collaborations and actually opening the door to this multidisciplinary approach of and holistic approach of dancer development. So, us dance scientists and strength and conditioning coaches, we need to have our doors open, but also dance educators and dance teachers, they need to, knock at the door and say, okay, how do we go about this?
Yes, that's great. Rob and Stevie, do you want to contribute also to that idea of like, how do we sift through all the information that's out there?
So, just to piggyback off of what Nico was saying, like, absolutely, it's like context specific will be important. And I think, and I feel like the words that I tend to fall upon or fall back on is always going to be purpose and intention. So, know your why, know why you're doing something, and make sure that, if you are working with somebody, make sure that they know your why as well, because ultimately as artists and even just as people, it really comes down to what your goals are, and being able to have conversations that identify those things successfully for you. like I said, like what we've been talking about, there's so much information out there. How do you know where these people are from? How do you know like what their background is? But I would say even something as quick, a quick Google search might even reveal something. Or if you know somebody that's like work with them, you know, think about not like what they're doing, but also how they're doing it. If I'm going to explain for myself, if I'm going to explain an exercise to somebody, I want to make sure that they know why I'm choosing to do it and why I'm choosing to do it for them. Granted, this is probably more like a one-on-one small group class situation, but in the large group, or even if you're just following someone on Instagram Live and you don't, you know, they can't see you and you can only see them. You know, I know I make it a point to really break down why we're doing certain things and not just trying to cram all this content out. Yeah, I think, yeah, there's so much more, there's so much information out there, but I think this is a time, especially for all of us to begin thinking about, you know, where are we getting our information from, and then how are we applying this information? So we're talking about, you know, strength and conditioning, things to think about and whatnot. And this isn't just specific to now. This is this is a long-term conversation, you know, as we get back to, you know, what we really have to call a new normal. You know, we're not going back to what we had before. So from here, it's an opportunity to, you know, begin to kind of examine these things and kind of, like Nico was saying, maybe just kind of take some time and really think about, you know, why we're doing certain things and how we can really set ourselves up and also set our students up for success as well, long term, physically, emotionally, mentally, academically, life. Yes.
Life skills. Yeah. Well, let's come back to the why, because I think that is a big question we need to talk about in terms of setting goals during this time. But Stevie, do you want to chime in also on the idea of how do you pick?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what everyone is saying is that there isn't a good way, or there aren't like set rules. For me, I often look at other associations. So who's putting it forward, or how is it being supported and posited? So in addition to how the individual is presenting the material, maybe what are their affiliations, or what other resources do I already know and trust? Yeah, and then I think a certain amount of intuition in terms of like really checking in and seeing how it resonates, whether it makes sense to you or lives inside of your wheelhouse. You know, I would love to start a whole bunch of new things, right? Like that now would be a great time for me to try hip hop classes. But if I do that and it's new in my body, I want to make sure that I'm stepping into it in a progressive way, rather than taking the hardest class that I can for 5 days a week and just hoping that it goes well. So there's also something, I think, progressive about trying something on, noticing how you feel after, and letting that be part of your guide, this physical instrument that we've been tuning as dancers and dance educators. I think is a really important tool that we can continue to rely on, even as other things seem new or different.
That was certainly something that I used a lot when I was a young dancer, was like, is all the information coming together? Like different people are saying it in different ways, but does it all seem to kind of dovetail together into a logical, sensible, cogent system or paradigm? So speaking about goals, because all of you have sort of hinted at this, and somebody has written in, Amanda has written in and asked about periodization and sort of talking about how athletes have off seasons and we don't often have that as dancers. So I think for dancers, a lot of times when it comes to fitness, they just think like, well, I should be my most fit self at all times in every component of my fitness. Like I should just try to be amazing at everything all the time. And that's really not an athletic mindset at all, is it? So instead, how do we shift from that to sort of thinking about, well, what can I do in quarantine and what are my goals? And, you know, for a lot of people, there will be no performances until 2021. You know, I know a lot of professional companies have gotten that notice. And, you know, depending on where you are in the world, if you're a student, that might mean competitions or conventions, those things might be canceled for a while. So in the face of not having to be performance ready, what can we do at this time? How do we think strategically about fitness when we're not used to that always as dancers? Should we go round again? Nico, do you want to start again?
Yeah, of course. It's a valid question, especially when there's no end point. So we don't know exactly when the end point is going to be. And given the example that I gave you before about the fighter, the mixed martial artist, it would be impossible to keep him at top performance for, let's say, 12 months to wait for a fight. So taking you back to that graph of how the training works and that residual effect of training and how long it lasts, this is where training organization can work at its best. As I said, there's no way we can do everything, but in my personal opinion, even though I was dreading online coaching when I realized that this is what we have to do, and having not done it in that sense, after a couple of sessions, I realized that it's actually working. And there were a few things that surprised me, and I couldn't have expected this. One was that the students were coming with a lot of energy. That means that, you know, the vocational education program is very full. We start with 19 hours a week at 12 years old, and for the graduates is close to 37 hours a week. That's a lot of hours of dance. And of course, not, as you know very well, not all of them are high intensity, but it's quite a lot of volume. So when they come to me, and when we are at the school, the majority of the time they're feeling tired. Whereas now, every time I see them, they're fresh and they're ready to work. So for me, as a strength coach, this is an opportunity to work on things that sometimes I don't have the luxury to do. And even though we're not at the gym and I don't have my fancy equipment and my fancy monkey bars and all the things that I have managed to develop at the school, I'm experimenting with some ideas in order to, let's start with the basics. Can we do the basics right and improve capacity? Can I get everybody just a little bit fitter aerobically by doing some circuit training? And it seems that I'm getting more work done now than I used to get when I was at the school. And there are a few reasons for that. One is the energy. And the other thing is that when you're working with adolescents and you have a group of, let's say, 20 or 25 adolescents, there is always going to be some distraction. There is never going to be a case or a class where you're going to have 25 people who want to work at the same pace and same intensity and the same appetite. There's always some people who don't want to do it as much. And there's always some people who simply just don't want to be there. They might be good dancers, but they don't want to be there. But when you are isolated in your place, you can't really distract anybody. And in the end, you end up doing more work than you used to do at the school because you're you in front of your camera and somebody's watching you. So if we use this time effectively and we are smart and we can think outside our box, we can be inventive and we can create scenarios where we challenge the students and we increase capacity. So for me, increased capacity is number one, especially for the younger population. For the older population, I need to maintain what they have as much as I can. And as we saw with the definitions, we might not be able to improve muscular strength or maximal strength. But I mean, you could spend some time doing isometric contractions. But how long are you going to spend in isometric training? And then if you spend too much time in isometric training, then you're going to have to convert this into something else if you're going to start jumping. So we need to be mindful. Again, you need to communicate with your dance educators and the dance teachers and create a plan that makes sense for everybody, for the educators, but also for the bodies of the dancer. So for the older dancers, I'm trying to maintain what they have, which means that even though they can't do the big jumps and the big technical jumps, that doesn't mean we can't jump. We can jump, it's just going to be raw jumps. It's going to be the jumps that we would normally do in the gym. And that's okay, because if we keep working on the mechanical properties of power, then we're going to have to simply apply this power into our technical jumps. So again, always thinking the positive of this is an opportunity to work on things that sometimes I don't get the chance to do, because in order to develop power, you need fresh neurons, you need fresh muscles. And it seems that now when I get the students, they are ready to go. And I can do stuff that I couldn't do because I would be a bit worried when they're doing 27 hours of dance a week. And they're saying to me, I want to jump higher. Yeah, but where am I going to fit this now? When you can only put 2 sessions a week because there is no time, and you are tired, and you have also shown us an injury in the shin, and your knee was hurting 2 months down the line when we started the school. It's very difficult to load this person even more. You have to be very gradual. Whereas now, because they're not doing so much dance, and if the dance educators can focus on the quality of the movement, the qualitative aspects of dance, that means that I can maybe have an opportunity to increase the raw engine. So that's how I see this as an opportunity for the young individuals to improve capacity. Can I make them last a little bit longer? And then for the older dancers, can I maintain what I have been working on, but also maybe even improve it?
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted. It's sort of about deconstructing dance, and I think
that's a beautiful way of putting it.
We do that in dance education. We do look at a student and say, that student isn't turning well. Is it because they don't have enough balance? Is it because they can't stay up long enough to do that? Is it because they don't have the coordination? And I think we have that, but it's the next step of saying, okay, how can I pick apart all the things that go into dance training, and what of those do I just have to let go of for now? And what of those can I really, really work on and sort of invest in? And I certainly understand I'm sure we all understand that point about overtrained dancers. Dancers are so exhausted, and I've lived that exhausted life, and yeah, you can't build on that exhaustion. So what else, Rob, what also comes to your mind in terms of like performance readiness and goal making during this time?
I think that, and Nico, that was great. Yeah, great response.
Thanks.
I feel like I just want to go back to the question initially where, I don't know, someone was asking about periodization. And I think obviously that's going to be a little more difficult to think about because periodization is going to be very personalized to a certain extent. It's going to depend like person to person. I think, especially during times in quarantine, and I like what Nico said about, getting the basics right. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, it's like this whole thing is affecting us as people, So before we are a dancer, we're also human, and to be able to address those things is still going to be beneficial. I mean, research-wise, there are a lot of things out there that talk about how even just kind of strengthening in neutral positions that's going to be beneficial for dancers, and I understand that we're constantly working in, a squat might not feel dance specific, but you are working systems and you are training systems that is going to benefit you in those way, in good ways, in positive ways. And I think with, what you were saying, Ellie, about breaking things down, deconstructing, absolutely, maybe this is a time where we begin to think about, yes. And I love that you use a specific example of turns, because there's so many things that go on in a turn. And, are we conscious of all these things? And are we purposeful and intentional in our turns? Am I just trying to turn as many times as I can until I can turn? Or am I going to be purposeful about it? And I'm reminded of, this is from like an IADMS regional meeting a couple of years ago, but MJ Lederbach was like, you can't do your sport to train, you have to train to do your sport. So and there's a whole other conversation about, is dance a sport? But let's frame it differently. It's you have to not just rely on dancing alone to train, but you have to train to dance, right? It's like we are highly technical performers for a lot of us, or there's a lot of like physiological and mental movement demand. And how do we prepare ourselves as people and return back to dance so we can have that strong foundation once again? So I think that's so important. And as far as right now is concerned, and thinking about getting back, there are some examples in the past where I know there are some schools that have a lot more extensively built dance medicine wellness situation. And, even for just like a regular summer, when all these dancers come back, they might not even do jumps for the first 2 or 3 weeks, because they're slowly just trying to ramp everybody up. So if we're talking about getting back into dance, the one thing I can definitely say is that it will take time, but once again, communicate. You need to know where people are coming from, and hopefully people find this, and the dance science is a thing. There are people that are doing research and things like that. There's applicable information that we can give that all of us are ready to give, and we just kind of need to find the people to give it to. So it's not saying that it has to be, unfortunately there is paucity of research because this is a new situation, but there are things that we can definitely do to, once again, be purposeful and intentional when we return back to dance. One thing I did want to highlight is there is a doctor that I am well acquainted with in my area, works with dancers, works with university dancers, and also works with a lot of youth athlete and youth sports population. And his thing from his past research is, usually when we get back to either new activities, or if we get back to activities after a long hiatus, usually around that 3-week mark is where you're going to want to be a little careful, especially because the novelty of getting back into dance is going to be, and performing is going to probably wear off a little bit. And at that point, people will be like, oh yeah, I need to, people are going to be feeling it because they haven't moved like that in a while. And so that's going to be that point where if I am now 2 weeks back into dance and I'm more tired because I haven't been moving like this, then once again, going back to fatigue, that's going to possibly play a role in injury risk, right? So I think that's, as far as hard data, there's, like I said, the sporting population is also, this is a question that they are talking about. So these are just kind of some general things that we begin to think about. Yeah.
What I like, one of the things I like was you talking about sort of the communicate. That's always something we need to talk, focus on in dance. But the identity, the whole dancer, the whole human, you know, we are not just like off from training. We are in a global crisis right now, you know. So thinking about that, and you know, in this panel we've decided to talk about this conditioning component, but we talked in the last one also about the whole dancer and how this could be a time to train. You know, we're talking about training power and strength, but you can also train identity, you can train resiliency, you can train recovery skills. You know, there's lots of different things that you can train during this time. Stevie, what are your goals right now with students, and what do you think those goals might be when we get back to the studio?
I'm thinking a lot about how we, sort of to Nico's point, how we slow down and really take a step back to simplify some movement activity and maybe develop some more efficient patterning, right? We can really rely on that neuromuscular component of our fitness by getting really efficient, especially at our stabilizing muscles. If we're not moving a ton or in our fullest range of motion, we really can, you know, so a lot of the work that I've been doing with my students and will continue to offer over the summer for them are opportunities to find trunk stability and core stability. There's some great resource papers on the IADMS website about that, but also just thinking about the ways in which we're connecting our movement, that the whole body is integrated rather than separate parts. Feels like we have an opportunity to be in a frame and to use the small space that we have in order to stay in touch with the whole, rather than worry about how heroic the big parts can be. Those will come back, and we'll be excited to do them when we have the space.
Paul wrote in, and he was asking about milestones or like prerequisites might be another way that we think about it. Like, as we return to dance, like, are there certain, and this is to my knowledge, but you all might know otherwise, to my knowledge, we don't have these in dance right now. You know, like, well, in order to be able to take a full, you know, modern dance class at full capacity, you should be able to, you know, run a mile without your heart rate getting to this or that. You know, I mean, these things exist in sport, right? So, but are there any milestones that sort of come to mind, or prerequisites that you're thinking about as we return to dance? Unmute, Rob.
All right. Yes, I mean, to my understanding, there aren't, like I said, new situations. So we're all trying to figure this out. But I will say what we can do probably qualitatively as we return back to teaching in a studio environment or classroom environment is that perhaps, once again, I give the example of, like, you know, first day back in ballet, you're not going to do Gran Allegro. I mean, that is probably a safe recommendation to make, because we need to, right, offer some time for self-assessment for the student, but also for the teacher as well. And I think, you know, maybe something as simple as, like, I'm going to limit my space and how far I'm traveling is going to be a way to kind of gauge how your students are moving, right? So I mean, I'm not saying like tape off a 3x3 foot, you know, or area in the studio.
That's happening because people are doing this social distancing. Dance teachers are doing that, like making squares. So
yes, absolutely. So yeah, exactly. So maybe that's you know, and I think the important thing about this is aside from you know, us being able to give some hopefully some concrete suggestions, is also to help provoke thought in our dance education population, and to really think about how we're approaching these things. And to a certain extent, it's like, yeah, if I'm not really sure, then reach out. And I know some people are reaching out in the chat, which is great. But yeah, I think that would probably right off the bat be my recommendation from obviously a physical movement standpoint, is going to be, as we get back to dance, let's think about what kind of stuff we're putting out there, and how we're ramping it up for our students. This is anecdotal, and this is just kind of like me keeping in touch with kind of professional sports, but you know, in I think late March in late March, early April. Even then, it was only a little bit of time, but they were already at that point talking about like, well, we're going to need at least like 25 to 30 days to ramp up. And so now we're a month in. So how much more time is that going to be? You know,
and maybe just like Paul bringing that question to the table. I mean, I think that alone, we don't have those benchmarks. We don't have those prerequisites established for dance, but we know them. Again, like you don't as a dance teacher have a student do an arabesque turn if they can't do an arabesque. You know, you don't have them do something on, you know, diving into the floor if you know they don't have the strength, right? So just revisiting those things, like maybe those first weeks back are like, you go through your whole thing, your whole checklist, you pretend like that student is 4 months less advanced than you know them to be, and you check, well, can they stand on one leg? If they can't stand on one leg, then we don't do long combinations on one leg, you know. We shift our weight a little bit more in the beginning.
Yeah. Or even things like one thing I can definitely think about as far as maybe modifying your movement would be like level changes. And if the max, let's say theoretically speaking, the maximal level change is going to be jumping up in the air and then coming back down to the ground like flat or a layout or something. But and then using that as your gauge, where it's like, well, instead of, you know, going from instead of incorporating just jumps, we start incorporating like, I mean, you can go up on your toes, but, you know, don't leave the floor, but at least you get a little bit of that activation again. And then as things progress, you slowly, all right, now let's get back to jumping. And now let's get back to the big dynamic activities, right? And ultimately, this is a question I think that a lot of not just dance educators, but also like parents and studio owners, you know, should be conscious of. And these are the questions that they should ask of their educators, right? Yeah, sorry, Nico, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, again, it can't be a one-man or one-woman show. This needs to be a collaborative effort. I think it is very important to stay close with your dancers or students and actually keep track of what they're doing, or ask them to keep track of what they're doing. So Rob mentioned it in his first talk, that not everybody is going to be at the same level. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. But we can definitely tick some boxes that everybody has done something. So to give you a few examples, I tell my students that if there is an opportunity for you to jog, I want you to jog. So I want you to go out for a jog. And we should be expecting from a healthy individual, a healthy young individual, to be able to jog for 20 minutes. Can you jog for 20 minutes without stopping and feeling you're dying? That's the first thing. If you can't jog, can you skip? So I have introduced skipping in the school, and I would say about 90% of the school can now use a skipping rope. And it's quite impressive after a few months of skipping, how you see 13 or 12-year-olds doing double unders. So can we skip? Can we keep that contact? Can we keep that activity going? And then can we make sure that we put some basic training for everybody? As I said before, go back to basics. Can we make sure that everybody has ticked the box? We have a circuit for aerobic endurance. How many of those have you done? And we have a circuit with jumping. How those have you done? Can we keep track of who's done what? And that will give us a picture when we start. And then going back to something that Rob said about the fact that we don't have, and I think Stevie, you touched on this as well, we don't have the space to do big movement. So this time it's going to be, when we start, it's not going to be like a typical summer. We're going to have to think of the volume, we're going to have to think of the intensity, and we're going to have to think of the range. We're going to have to think of the range of movement. And all of these need to be taken into consideration the first week, the second week, the third week. And it is true, because, and I have data from our own school, that if we go too fast, then third, fourth week, this is when injuries start spiking up. So I think because we have lost so much movement and because there is a lot of sedentary life now, I think we're going to have to be even more mindful about the body of the young dancer or the experienced dancer. And the progressive loading is going to have to be the rule. You can't think that oh, we're just going to 1 week and then we're going to be okay. It's not going to be that easy. It's going to take longer, and you're going to have to go away of the curriculum. You're going to have to forget the curriculum, and you're going to have to think of, it has to be a dancer-centered approach, which is something that it has to be anyway. But if the teaching is driven by a curriculum, then you're probably going to end up in a situation that you're not going to enjoy.
Stevie, you want to get in there too?
Thank you so much. I mean, I guess the only, in addition to every brilliant thing that's been offered so far, I want to also say that, if your heart is breaking a little bit thinking about like no grande allegro or no big movement or no whatever, there's also a way to conceive of the simplest version of that, right? So is it about skipping and moving across the floor without worrying about all of the technical intricacies of some of the movement material? So as we return back to dance and want to fill ourselves back up with that joyfulness as well as all of the safety considerations, I do want us to be creative, continue to be creative about what Nico is saying, curriculum or our expectation, or I think this is where improvisation, even if that feels like a bad word inside of some of our more codified techniques, that there is like still this joy of moving through space.
I'm so glad you brought that back, because sometimes in dance we can be like so training centric, and like you're all saying, like we're also people, and like sometimes people just like take a little, you can just take a little skip, you can do a little, like there are things that you can do that are physical and joyful and exuberant and move through space, but maybe you have to scale back on some of the other components. So like you're saying, maybe it has to be more of your more natural organic movement, and not with perfectly pointed feet and with your back doing this complicated twist and with this timing to the music. Maybe you have to take away some of those components and just find something that actually works for your body for where it's at. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about sort of the ways in which we can start to hone artistry and then return from that place, right? That we're thinking about expressive capacity or the acknowledgement of multiple people in the room. How exciting will it be to like be in a real studio with a person and not a flat two-dimensional, right? Like that, all of that, I think we can really capitalize on as we build in these slow progressive returns back to the fitness part. But the fitness of the whole human then is still acknowledged, and we're still dancing. Yeah.
That's great. Let's finish up. Let's take a few more like reflections on that, and then we'll sort of work to wind down. I see you, Nico.
By actually working with the students, how I ended up developing something that was working better for them. So I come up with ideas, but because I haven't done this before online, I'm not really sure whether it's going to work. And the first time we tried something complex, I had to ask them, did it work? And they said, no. And then the second time we did it, it was a little bit better. And every time they were giving me a problem, I was trying to find a solution. And then the third time we did it, it actually worked. So being open to failure, I think is something that empowers both the student, but also me as well, because there's no way I could have known that this was going to work or not going to work, especially when you go away from the basics. As I said to you, we do the basics with the younger ones, but then the older ones want something a little bit more tricky for them to do, and something more challenging. So coming up with an idea and then thinking, okay, guys, I've come up with something, but let's see, is it going to work? It took us 3 efforts. The third one was a good circuit. So I don't know whether you want to.
Well, Stevie has definitely, I think that speaks to a lot of your philosophy.
I mean, right, Nico and I, we talked about this when we did our little pre-chat, but there is something about agency that I think we're teaching right now. How to this communicate starts not when we return, but right now, where like I really am looking for my students to tell me what's working, what's not, what they think they might need, and that we're developing a really important skill for our dancers who are, you know, maybe in previous generations we weren't valuing that kind of collaborative energy or sort of valuing the dancer experience and instead expecting them to replicate. And now we're in a moment in history where it is not necessarily about, well, what do I want or how I did it is how you will. None of us have done this before, and so we have an opportunity, I think, to really grow our practice in terms of the clarity of our language, the variety of our imagery and other sort of learning modalities, and then also this trial and error of like, okay, well, let's try, let's see, and obviously, you know, listen to your bodies, be smart and modify in your physical space, all of those safety considerations. But yeah, I don't know. I'm so excited to be developing dancers that can think and speak for themselves because they should be, right?
Absolutely. Well, that feels like a good place to pause. I just really thank all of you so much for doing this. Again, Nico and Rob and Stevie, thank you so much for being here, and IADMS for organizing all of these, you know, helping to promote these things, and thank you so much. I just really appreciate all of you so much. Thank you.
I think it was